Hi, my name is Marcy Kumatani, and this is my informational interview oral presentation. So I interviewed Holly Higby for my project, and I really enjoyed getting to know her and hearing about her experiences, and I contacted her through rid.org. So a little bit of background information about her. Holly has been interpreting since 1997. She started taking American Sign Language classes in her senior year of high school, and then furthered her education in an interpreting training program at Mesa Community College in San Diego. She received her certificate in transliteration and certificate in interpretation in 2003 and 2004. She likes to work with the post-secondary college level and perform art interpreting. One example of her work with art interpreting is signing Shakespeare at the Shakespeare Festival in Boise, which she has done a couple of years. One thing I thought important to ask Holly was what qualities does a person need to possess to be a successful interpreter? Her first answer was a good attitude. From her experiences, between the choice of having a highly skilled interpreter with a lousy attitude and a pretty good interpreter but not as skilled that has a great attitude, a deaf person will always go with the interpreter with a great attitude. It is ideal when an interpreter is professional but can still be friendly and have a good attitude. She also noted that being a people person will go a long way in this profession, not only with clients but with teaming situations. She would prefer teaming with someone who is friendly and has a great attitude, even if they are less talented than an interpreter who is highly skilled but has a bad attitude. One of the big concepts we focused on in class was the role that cultural differences play in the interpreting profession. So I, of course, asked her about her experiences with working with different cultures and how she prepares for it. Well, majority of the time she is dealing with the differences between deaf and hearing culture. One thing she said she has to deal with in these situations is interpreting facial expressions for deaf people. For example, when a deaf person replies to a question by shaking their head no, but does not sign anything, the hearing person will still look to the interpreter for an explanation. So it might seem obvious that the deaf person is essentially saying no, but not to some hearing people. So it is important for an interpreter to vocalize facial expressions. Another thing Holly mentioned was sarcasm. As an interpreter, you have to be culturally aware of what sarcasm is and what is meant as a double negative becomes a positive. There are certain things that hearing people say that when just translated straight would not make any sense and portray the wrong intentions. She explained that this is a part of picking up on the speaker's intent, understanding the layers of the context. Holly hasn't had too much experience dealing with different ethnicities, but she did bring up a fascinating story about the differences she's seen in the signing style of the Midwest Coast versus the East Coast. Holly had worked with someone from New York and claimed that her signing was incredibly fast, that it took a while to understand her fingerspelling. Compared to Idaho, signers here have a slower signing style, and this very much depicts a similar style of talking, with a faster paced speech on the east than in the west side. Another big topic I was curious about was her opinion on the advancing technology and effects it has had on her work. First, she commented on the positive effects that technology has had on her job, such as how her experience working with video relay service helped to improve her receptive skills. She was being exposed to different signing styles across the United States and learning new signs and to read these different styles. She also talked about how that experience helped her to realize that you have to be honest when interpreting. You have to be willing to admit when you don't know something, and people appreciate it. Another positive is that it has made communicating with the deaf much easier through technology such as texting. One of the negative effects is video remote interpreting, replacing local interpreters in hospital settings. Moreover, most deaf and hard of hearing people prefer having an actual interpreter present instead of an interpreter on screen. The last topic I focused on was what challenges do interpreters face constantly. She first brought up the process of getting paid for work can take time when working through an agency or just yourself. It really depends on the place, but Holly has experienced a wait time from 2 to 3 weeks. Or from 2 to 3 months, sorry. Second, when being hired to interpret, people will try to get the best deal that they can because hiring an interpreter can get expensive. So, like Holly has experienced before, you have to explain that there is a 2-hour minimum and a team is required if they are needed for more than an hour long. It involves being assertive and having the patience to teach the community certain rules about sign language interpreting. Another challenge she mentioned was dealing with family members of clients. Sometimes family members will be present and will want to take over and interpret, but it is important for an interpreter to assert their role, but at the same time not offend anyone. It is also common for hearing people who are curious and uneducated about the deaf and deaf culture to ask ridiculous questions, such as, "Are you able to drive?" to a deaf person. As an interpreter, you have to stay neutral. You can't show or portray a reaction to that. You have to let the deaf person answer and react how they want to, and just do your job to interpret what was communicated. I learned a lot from this interview, and it was a great experience being able to talk with and hear stories from an actual interpreter. I really liked her comments on having a good attitude, because I think that could apply to almost any job when working with people. Being able to work professionally, but also build a good relationship or camaraderie is important in this field of work. When I first asked Holly about working with cultural differences, I really expected a story about ethnic cultural differences and the influence of their norms and traditions. But her story about signing styles in the West versus the East made me realize that cultural differences don't have to be these huge ethnic contrasts. Even a particular location, whether it's a state or city away, could have a different culture from your own. With our discussion on technology, I learned a lot. I had no idea about hospitals using VRI to replace local interpreters, and how much an interpreter working VRS can really learn from the experience. The advancing technology made me think about how further advancements could affect the interpreting profession. Holly thinks that this won't be taking over the interpreting profession as a whole because of the difficulties with internet and connectivity in some areas, but I think there's a possibility that businesses will want to use technology more if it becomes cheaper and more convenient. When we talked about the challenges she faces in the work field, her answers made me realize that being an interpreter, you're not just dealing with the client. There's more to the job than just interpreting. Whether it's working through an agency, working with companies and businesses, family members, and curious hearing people, an interpreter deals with a lot more than most people think. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation, and thank you for watching.